And Community College. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Michael Flanagan.
Thank you, Brian. So we're gathered again this year. This is our third year in a row. A great collaboration between the Greater HARLEM Chamber of Commerce and Columbia Climate School. So this is the seventh conference, biannual conference. And so we're happy that you're all here. Just take 10 seconds to say hello to your neighbor. Front, back, side, left, right.
Hello, neighbor.
Okay, cut. So it's my pleasure to introduce Skip Dillard, who will be our MC for the evening. Skip is a seasoned media executive and respected leader in the radio industry. He currently serves as brand manager of 94.7 The Block, New York City. He's a former AVP for Odyssey's Showback, both R&B and rhythmic AC stations across America. Now, you might know Skip's influence more in WBLS and WLIB New York. Of course, we all know that there's also Winston 10, which is listened to by the largest audience across the country of any radio station. So just to give you a little bit more about Skip, Skip has extensive programming background that spans major markets such as Buffalo, Detroit, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. Beyond radio, Skip took a year to serve as managing editor of Top 40 and Urban Radio for Billboard's Airplay Monitor, further solidifying his influence in music and media. He serves on several boards, and we're particularly proud that he's on the executive board of the Greater HARLEM Chamber of Commerce. He's a proud graduate of HBCU, Hampton University. He's been honored by the U.S. Congress, the New York City Council, the state of New Jersey, and more for his many contributions. Please welcome Skip.
Thank you so much, and honored to be here once again for this all-important gathering. I was here last year and the year before, and you know, I wish the room was 3 times as full with what we're dealing with. From, if you think about the LA fires back this winter, the Texas floods last month that took over 135 persons, including, I believe, 27 young girls that were attending a camp. It seems like climate change is affecting all of us, and New York is certainly not immune. Some of New York's greatest problems are rising sea levels and flooding. If any of you saw the TikTok videos from the subway week before last when those storms hit, you know that's the case. No statistics needed there. Extreme heat. A couple weeks ago, we were hurting. In fact, last week at this time, we were hurting. Stronger storms and rainfall impact us constantly. It's not just rain, it's torrential rain. Public health risk, more heat-related illnesses, air pollution has increased. Mold is more prominent in our homes and businesses post-flooding. And of course, the economic and infrastructure strain. We don't want to hear about MTA raising fares, but they almost have no choice today. It also affects LaGuardia and JFK, which are mighty close to water. Whenever you're taking off, I seem to get a little nervous about that. But most of all, we live in a 2025 when some members of our federal government have put climate change and its effects on the back burner. We're below the eradication of DEI. We are below even the Epstein files, it feels like. But the good news is you're here. We know our president, Lloyd Williams, is here in spirit. And because we're here, we can work together. And we have the challenge of keeping up the fight, even during times when it seems like we're out here all alone. So look, let's come together, work together, and address climate change as we know it needs to be realized. Thank you, and right now I want to introduce Winston Majette from the Greater Harlem Chamber and Harlem Week with our remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip Dillon. You are one of our treasured Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce board members. My name is Winston Majette, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. Some of you may just know me from the Harlem Week Festival, which is 51 years old this year, and I've been doing that since 1980. I was a 17-year-old coming out of Martin Luther King High School, and I was a revolutionary young man. And I thought that what was said to us in 1974 by then President Gerald Ford, New York City can drop dead, was the headline on the New York Daily News, that I have to be a part of the solution to that and not just listen to that on deaf ears. So from that one day, when we created Harlem Day in 1974, we ended up trademarking to Harlem Week, and only in Harlem can you do 30 days of events and still keep calling it Harlem Week. But this is a very important focus, not only for Harlem Week, but for the Chamber of Commerce, of the four focuses that there are. And technology is another. We have our chairperson for technology in the back, Mr. Clayton Banks, the president and CEO of Silicon Harlem. And he's been already working with the New York City Senior Citizens Committee. And we had about 209 people here, but thanks to our producer, Mr. Marco Nobles, and producer, Mr. Robert Allen, we stream these events as we're doing today. So it's already reached thousands of people. What we do with senior citizens, and this too will reach thousands and thousands of people from today going forward. So we thank you all for coming out. One of my favorite days is the first public day of Harlem Week, which is called the Great Day in Harlem. Some of you may know the photographs, the famous photograph that was shot in Harlem of these great jazz and R&B musicians. And we adopted that phrase. And we turned it into the first Sunday public event that we do, a Great Day in Harlem. And that's going to be at Ulysses S. Grant. Some of you know it as Grant's Tomb this Sunday on the 10th. And we'll be doing a plethora of events and activities on that day with hundreds of vendors internationally, nationally, and locally. And we invite you to come out to listen to gospel, community events and activity performers. And we have a special concert called Concert Under the Stars. Some of you, I know my mix master there, Mitch, has a lot of music over there. And one of his favorite artists is Roberta Flack. So on Sunday, we'll be repping Roberta Flack, and we'll be killing you softly with a lot of our music done by our musical director, Mr. Ray Chu. And way back in '74, there was a unknown group from New Jersey that we had as our first pop, rock, R&B group to perform. A little known group called Kool and the Gang. And we'll be honoring Kool and the Gang on this Sunday. So we invite you to come out from 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. to 122nd Street and Riverside Drive. And what DJ Mitch was sharing with me, he says, well, I'm going to be tired because on Saturday tonight, I'm doing the Percy Sutton 5K run. So I don't know if I can be there on time, but he'll be there on time because it's going to be a very special day. And on Saturday, we're going to be honoring the Honorable Percy Sutton. He's one of the persons that encouraged us to do Harlem Day and now Harlem Week and then Harlem Week and a half. And you all know him probably mostly from the New York Amsterdam News, which he was the owner of, Mr. Wilbur Tatum. You also probably know him from the world famous Apollo Theater, which he brought back to life in the 80s. And many of us that worked on Harlem Week were volunteers to help him bring back the Apollo. And you'll see a lot of people that Harlem calls the Harlem Heroes that are honored over there on the marquee. And on 126th Street, you see James Brown Way, which is honored to James Brown right after he passed away, who did many, many concerts there. So we invite you to come out on Saturday. And if you want to walk, one of our special chamber board members, very favorite of mine, is the Honorable Hazel N. Dukes. You may remember she was the president of the New York State NAACP, and she just recently passed. And one of the things I'm glad for me, I spoke to her on Valentine's Day. And I never call Hazel on Valentine's Day because she's got a long list of admirers. And I happened to catch her when I landed in Baltimore, and she said to me, "You never called me on Valentine's Day." And I said, "I was just thinking about you because you're just one of a kind." And I was at Gracie Mansion, and the mayor was honoring you. And he says, "Where's Hazel?" I said, "She's at a meeting. She can't come." And after that, she has an NAACP meeting. And then that weekend, there was a meeting of the Black and Hispanic Caucus in Albany that she was always at scheduled for. So I was really glad to speak to her. And she transitioned about 20, 30 days later. But I tell you, we have a magnificent board for which Skip is a part of. Myself, I work on that board as well. And I invite you, as Clayton would say, to reach out to the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. You can call us at 212-862-7200 or visit us on the website, www.greaterharlemchamber.com, and see what we're doing and find out how you can participate. So as Michael said, we've been doing, this is the seventh in a series of these events we've been doing with not only Columbia University, but also the City College of New York. And the irony of it all is we just recently did CBS 2. We did an interview, and right before the live interview, the weatherman gets on and he says, "Well, you're expecting rain to come, and it should be a flood." And I'm like, "Okay, good. Say that right before I have to come on and promote all the week." And the newscaster said, "Well, what do you have coming up?" I said, "I have the climate change conference so people can learn how they can avoid getting caught up in this climate change problem." So we went, Dan, you should be happy to know we started the interview and ended the interview on this climate change conference, thanks to all the work you and your staff have put together the last several years to help us do this event. So you're going to hear from some historic people, famed people, people who work at the White House, people who work at Gracie Mansion in the mayor's office, presidents of colleges and universities today. And they're going to tell you how enriched we are in fighting this problem, which we call climate change. So sit back, relax, have a good time, because you're going to be very informed today.
All right, we'll have your attention to the screens. We have a special video presentation, Creating Climate Solutions with Urban Communities. and the Honorable Sheila Foster is presenting that for us.
Certain communities across the world continue to face disproportionate exposure to environmental hazards.
Check.
And the significant barriers to global environment. Certain communities are located near industrial facilities, which increases their exposure.
Time blanks, 2 seconds. You can slide this over here. Yeah.
Plug in perfect.
Mitch. Mitch. Is it hot? That's how horrific this climate change is. They say a picture is 1,000 words. The audio didn't even want to come on. It's like, hey, I'm standing back. They looking at these pictures of floods. Hey, I'm not even gonna get involved. So that's how horrific climate change is. So you can see from the images, you're gonna see some of the people like Sheila, who's gonna be speaking to you later and telling you more about it. But it was scaring me just watching it. I was like, oh boy, there's not even sound coming out. It's afraid to come out and be a part of this program. But we'll continue to show you the video and you'll get a snapshot of what's been going on across the nation and across the world in terms of planes not leaving the airport in Paris. I tell you, Canada, I was ready to go to Canada. I only get 3 days vacation out 38 years. And then I woke up in 10 winds. Skip? Thank God. I'm glad you went 10 winds because I believed them when they told me I should not be going to Canada. But, you know, we're dealing with those things. And, I mean, it's because of you while we are finding solutions. So if you bear with my technicians, but we'll keep the program running so you can hear from the fabulous panelists that are coming up. So I thank you for your patience.
Make sure that cities are not just those
Can we check to see the mute button?
Looks like we're going to move forward, Winston. And We will move on with Charles Powell, Senior Project Manager, the Greater Harlem Housing Development Corporation, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. Skip referenced it, but let me stand in the middle. But certainly today is a difficult day for many of us. I stand here in the footsteps of a great man, someone who I've known for 61 years. I was 15 years old when he took me under his wing, and I'm still under his wing. So I just wanted to give that shout out. I told Peggy Shepard, who I'm introducing, that I'm going to be speaking in the spirit of Lloyd Williams today. So, you know. And I got 2 pages to read, Peggy, and we could go on, and it could be 8 pages, and it still wouldn't be enough. So I wanted to just say some things about how it's important for us to honor people while they are with us. So I have a couple of things that, when I think of Peggy, lifesaver. She's a lifesaver. You know, the work that she is doing is saving lives. She's our protector. She's protecting not just each of us in this room, not just our beloved Harlem, not just our city of New York, but protecting everything that she does with We Act. She's protecting us. You know, I say she's a good troublemaker. You know, John Lewis would be proud of Peggy. She knows how to, you know, be that, you know, little, you know, annoying, you know, but effective, you know, protector and lifesaver. You know, she speaks truth to power. I don't know if you know, but Peggy has no difficulty when she comes into a room. Everybody knows she's going to get it straight. I've been on uniform new land use review processes, and when you have these big architects and urban planners who come and talk about, you know, how great this development is going to be and environmentally sound, and here comes Peggy and We Act, and will tell you that ain't true. And that's why I'm talking about how she protects our community. Because once buildings come up, you know, and then it's too late. But Peggy is at the front line of dealing with that. She's our advocate. She's our monitor, you know, and she's our reporter of truth. So while I read what she is on this paper, I want you to remember, you know, that she is somebody that I cherish, and I think that we cherish, and I don't mind saying it because that's what Lloyd told me to say. Okay? All right, Peggy Shepard is the co-founder and executive director of We Act. We love We Act for environmental justice. And for the longest time, before anybody knew anything about environmental justice, We Act was doing that work. I hope y'all believed it, you know, and understand that. Nobody else was talking about this other than Peggy years and years ago. Amen? So, and has a long history of organizing and engaging Northern Manhattan, too small residents, because she engages the world, in community-based planning and campaigns to address environmental protection and environmental health policy locally and nationally. She has successfully combined grassroots organizing, environmental advocacy, and, you know, how dare somebody call me in the middle of the thing, excuse me. And, you know, I mean, so Lloyd would just have, he would just be loving this. He'd be looking at me. You know, he has successfully combined grassroots organizing, environmental advocacy, and environmental health community-based participatory research to become a national leader in advancing environmental policy and the perspective of environmental justice in urban communities. And I think Patty would agree, we don't need to read any further because you don't need to be hearing from me anymore. So it is an honor. It is a privilege to introduce your next speaker, the beloved Peggy Shepard.
Get this back in here. I need some help.
No worries.
Okay, so thank you. Good evening, everyone. Great to see you all. Again, I'm Peggy Shepard, Executive Director and co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice of West Harlem Environmental Action. So for those of you who may not be familiar with We Act, we're a community-based organization. We've been advocating for environmental and climate justice for the past 37 years. We have more than 1,000 members and are based here in Harlem, serving all the communities in northern Manhattan, including Washington Heights and Inwood. And we have now a federal policy office down in Washington, D.C., because what happens on Capitol Hill impacts what happens on Sugar Hill and here in Harlem. Now, I got my start years ago as a Democratic district leader with Chuck Sutton. Some of you may remember Chuck. As absolutely the nephew of Percy Sutton. But we were working together as Democratic district leaders in West Harlem when, back in 1988, the North River Sewage Treatment Plant, which is located in the Hudson River in West Harlem, that plant began construction there. And, you know, it had been rejected by the Upper West Side, where originally it was going to be sited. So they decided to move it up to Harlem. They kept residents in the dark about it. They did agree to build a park, Riverbank State Park, on top of the plant, just to ease the burden of having this source of pollution in our community. But, you know, that didn't really stop or hide the pollution. It was built with open sewage tanks that snug up the entire neighborhood. And because it was not built to code, the plant was also pumping out toxic emissions from the first day, adding to the already polluted air in Harlem. So we protested, we got into some good trouble. We held up traffic at 7 a.m. on the West Side Highway, got out and stopped all of the traffic, and we really got noticed at that point. And the city understood what we were beginning to say. And again, we achieved a settlement, $55 million to fix the brand new facility, along with a $1.1 million environmental health fund for the community, and the latter of which led to the formation of West Harlem Environmental Action, which we know today as We Act. We then looked around and understood that the MTA had all of their bus depots uptown. Of the 7 in Manhattan, all 6 were up in Harlem. And again, we had to launch a Dump Dirty Diesel campaign to raise awareness of the health impacts of diesel bus exhaust in our community. And we also started advocating for the MTA to invest in clean fuel buses only and to modify its bus depots to accommodate natural gas buses and abide by the city's idling laws. And we actually got the Republican governor, George Pataki, to invest in 300 natural gas buses. And so that was the first government intervention there. But, you know, the MTA still pretty much tried to ignore us and ignore the issue. So in 2000, we filed a Title VI complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation, which charged the MTA with violating the civil rights of Northern Manhattan residents. Now, the MTA eventually saw the light. Years later, it agreed to retrofit the depots and start investing in diesel retrofits and hybrids, reducing its bus tailpipe emissions by 95% citywide. So again, these are just a few examples of some of the early work that we have been doing over the past 37 years. And again, working with the community to prevent the city from reopening the 135th Street Marine Transfer Station. So there's this other little building in the Hudson River. It used to be the building there. And again, it was where garbage was floated up the river and dumped there. And so again, we wanted to stop the city from reopening that transfer station. So we also began working with the community to create the West Harlem Piers Park, really saving the waterfront land from developers. And we worked with the community and the MTA to create a cooperative vision for the rebuilding of the Mother Clara Hale bus depot, which was across the street from Esplanade Gardens, where we had just an amazing amount of community support and action around that. And so again, by really talking to the MTA, beginning to negotiate with them, we began to get them to move towards building the first LEEDs rated bus depot in the nation. And LEEDs is a law around environmental design issues. So we've had a number of, I'd say, policy wins over the years. We helped pass Local Law 1 of 2004, which was designed to end childhood lead poisoning in New York City. However, the lack of enforcement largely undermined that effort, but we continue the fight. And back then, I should say, we met a woman who had a lead poisoned child named Cordell Clare, and we had a coalition to end lead poisoning, and we made Cordell the coordinator of that citywide campaign. She was very, very effective. And then we went on to pass New York City's Asthma-Free Housing Act in 2017, which prioritizes prevention, requires landlords to inspect and correct indoor allergen hazards. So more recently, we helped pass Local Law 154 of 2021, which requires that all new buildings built in the city be all electric. Now, this was a huge win because 71% of New York City's greenhouse gas emissions, which is the air pollution that causes climate change, comes from buildings burning fossil fuels like natural gas. And this law went into effect for buildings under 7 stories last year, and taller buildings will need to be built gas-free beginning in July 2027. So we went on then to pass a similar law for New York State, which I'm happy to report just completed its rulemaking process. It will go into effect for smaller buildings statewide next year. Another notable state win is the Environmental Justice Citing Law, which the governor signed into law on December 31st, 2022. And this landmark environmental justice legislation ensures that the cumulative impacts of all sources of pollution in a community are taken into consideration in the state's environmental permitting processes when potentially polluting facilities seek permits in disadvantaged communities. It's an historic move, making New York the second such city in the nation with such a law, and the state with such a law. And again, this was groundbreaking. It really follows New Jersey's groundbreaking legislation, which they signed in 2020, which was advanced by the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance and other groups there. So we know that low-income communities and communities of color throughout New York State have historically been burdened by a disproportionate number of pollution-generating facilities such as factories, power plants, bus depots, sewage treatment plants, garbage dumps, transfer stations, trucking centers. And this inequitable siting has turned these communities into environmental sacrifice zones with the cumulative impacts of these multiple sources of pollution exponentially harming their residents, causing health impacts such as asthma, lung and heart disease, increased birth defects, and learning impairments. Now, current laws and regulations do not take the cumulative impacts of pollution into account when they are approving facilities, instead treating them as if they were the only source of pollution that residents would have to endure, which is why the environmental justice citing law is such a significant step in addressing the environmental racism that has plagued the health and well-being of communities like ours for generations. Now, the state is in the rulemaking process for this law, so we will be doing outreach in the coming weeks and asking for your input. I also want to mention that WEACT is building an environmental justice center on West 140th Street, right across the street from City College. And it will serve as our new headquarters, but will also be a home for the environmental justice movement and for environmental education. Now, once completed, the center will enable us to really strengthen our ability to serve as a movement. And I should say that we coordinate a national coalition of groups around the country, about 50 organizations working in communities around environmental justice. And so again, it helps us to convene these groups in a hub. And it really strengthens our ability to serve as a movement builder, share our knowledge, experience, and best practices, along with capacity building resources, including funding other allies across the country. The center will also serve as a convening space and technical assistance hub. It'll be equipped with technology for science, engineering, arts, math education, and citizen science. So we'll really be able to scale up our community-based education, workforce development, and civic engagement efforts that really directly empower Northern Manhattan residents and our young folks. Now, currently, we also facilitate the Manhattan Clean Energy Hub for NYSERDA. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And this online resource really connects Manhattan residents and small businesses to local experts who can help you save money and access affordable energy efficiency upgrades and job opportunities. I imagine there's at least one person here in this room who would be interested in this resource, so we also have some flyers available. Now, at last year's conference, I talked about all the positive things the Biden administration had been doing to advance environmental justice. The new administration, of course, been waging war on environmental justice, seeking to not only undermine all the success we have achieved, but also to erase the ideas of equity and justice from the federal government. Now, unfortunately, we've had 2 of our grants from EPA terminated, as others have nationwide, but we feel this was done illegally and we are pursuing the matter in court. And we're resisting every rollback Trump has made around environmental issues. We were able to reinstate most of the rollbacks they made during their previous term, and the movement came out stronger afterwards. But we're really less than 7 months in, and the damage being done has already been horrific, and it's chaotic. Now, despite all this chaos and turmoil happening these days, I do have some good news to share. New York City is the first and only city we know of that has issued a comprehensive report on the environmental justice issues impacting our neighborhoods, including here in Harlem. It's called the Environmental Justice New York City Report. I think they did a fantastic job pulling it together, and you're going to hear from them a little later. You can find a copy on the literature table along with some handouts with QR codes that link to the report. But let me take just a step back and explain how we got here. Well, you know, when I started WEACT 37 years ago, one of our goals was to ensure that environmental justice was on the city's agenda, that our leaders really understood the disproportionate burdens that our communities face, and that they were willing to work toward equitable solutions to address these disparities. And that's why we advocated for the New York City legislation, Intro 359 of 2014 and Intro 886 of 2015, which really required the city to develop a study of environmental justice areas, the establishment of an environmental justice portal, and to produce a plan for addressing the issues identified. So in 2016, I provided testimony before the New York City Council Committee on Environmental Protection, as did my colleagues Michael Johnson of the South Bronx, Beryl Thurman of the North Shore Waterfront Conservancy of Staten Island, and the late Cecil Corbin Mark, among others. And as part of my testimony, I explained that we need to better understand what the disproportionate environmental impacts are, which communities are most impacted by what and why. And the purpose of Intro 359 was to conduct a thorough study to answer these questions. Now, I also emphasize that beyond the study, we needed to hear directly from affected communities and to develop a plan to address those issues based on the report the city has done and community input. And that was the purpose of Intro 866, which included developing an environmental justice advisory board, as well as an interagency task force that would develop a plan to address the issues identified. So along with environmental justice advocates from around the city, we helped pass both bills, which became Local Law 60 and 64 of 2017. Now, it took far longer than necessary, but in April 2024, the city finally released the Environmental Justice New York City report and mapping tool. And, it was informed by comments from more than 1,000 New Yorkers, organizations, elected officials on the climate, environmental, and health issues that really impact those communities. Nearly 70% of the survey participants came from EJ communities, and I'm happy to report that we made sure folks in Harlem's voices were heard. Now, as chair of the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board, which provided guidance on the development of the report, I am so pleased with the outcome. It's good, comprehensive, ensures that environmental justice is on the city's agenda. And now that we have this report and mapping tool, everyone in city government can fully understand the disproportionate environmental burdens our communities face. For example, the report found that East Harlem and Central Harlem rank among the top 5 neighborhoods in the city for poor air quality. They also rank among the top 5 neighborhoods for households without air conditioning. Now, air pollution and extreme heat are 2 issues we've been working to address. So this wasn't a great revelation, but between the report and the mapping tool, you can find out what issues are most impacting your neighborhood, which is very helpful to everyone from elected officials to community-based organizations. But what comes next, though, is really even more important, and that's developing a comprehensive citywide plan to address the report. And engaging with the residents of New York's environmental justice communities, those most impacted by these issues, will be critical in developing equitable, effective solutions. So WEACT has joined forces with the city's mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, which released the report, to work together on a city outreach effort to engage communities and to get their input on the plan. And we had secured a significant grant of $3 million from the EPA to undertake that work. And of course, unfortunately, that was one of the grants that the current administration terminated. Again, we feel this was done illegally, and we are pursuing resolution in the courts. But we're also seeking alternative sources of funding because this work is so important. And in fact, we're planning to host a charrette here in Harlem in October, followed by another up in Washington Heights or Inwood, to get direct input from local communities on how to really best address some of these issues. So a well-conceived, well-implemented, fully funded plan can really begin to solve these issues. And working with those of you who face them every day is certainly the best way to do that. So I want to celebrate this first ever assessment of environmental justice in New York City, and possibly for any city in America. And we hope you will join us as we now face the critical challenge of gathering community input to inform this plan, which will help advance environmental justice here in Harlem and across the city. So thank you very much. It's so great to see you all here today. And I know we're going to hear from a wonderful panel of folks who can make a difference here in this city. And we need them to make that difference. So thank you.
All right, one more time for Dr. Peggy Shepard. She is amazing individual. So I want to take a second just to thank our sponsors, of course, the Columbia Climate School, Columbia University. Thank you so much for being with us. The West Harlem Development Corporation, Small Business Administration, Con Edison, Odyssey, Rethink Food, We Act for Environmental Justice, Harlem Week, the National Urban League, the Harlem Community Development Corporation, Amazon Access, Harlem Arts Alliance, City College of New York, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and Medgar Evers College. Also, media partners Amsterdam News, AM New York, Fox 5, 1010 Wins, Christian Times, and our good friends at Community Board 10. All right, looks like it is panel time, and I'm going to ask Dr. Flanagan to come up here and get us prepared and introduce our moderator. All right, thank you.
How are we doing? All right. So, you probably realize that the theme here this afternoon are all climate change advocates. You listen to all of them. They're folks like Peggy Shepard, and you'll hear from the panel coming up shortly. But I do want to talk about this gentleman that I'm going to introduce. That's Dan Zarrilli. And Dan, at the very time, you went to Columbia joined Columbia in 2021, and we started these conferences in 2022. So, it's something there, I don't know. But it has been a really great partnership working with Dan and the Columbia Climate School. So just to give you a brief synopsis of this very long resume. So Dan is the first ever Chief Climate and Sustainability Officer at Columbia University, where he leads and coordinates the university's wide-ranging efforts to achieve its climate commitments and sustainability goals. He served previously as a special advisor for climate and sustainability, where he supported the creation of the Columbia Climate School and advised the university on institutional climate action. He joined Columbia University from the New York City Mayor's office, where he served until 2021 in the role of Chief Climate Policy Advisor. With senior climate and resilience appointments from Mayor Michael Bloomberg and Mayor Bill de Blasio, Dan positioned New York City as a global leader in the fight against climate change. Some very notable successes that include launching a comprehensive $20 billion climate adaptation program, enacting Local Law 97 to decarbonize the city's most polluting buildings, and divesting the city's pension funds from fossil fuel reserve owners and investing billions into climate solutions. Under his leadership in 2019, New York City released its updated long-term strategic plan, One NYC 2050. He is also an author of the 5th National Climate Assessment. He's a member of the New York Independent System Operators Environmental Advisory Council, advises the C40 Center for Climate Policy and Economy, is part of the Advisory Council for the Climate Museum, and serves as a mayoral appointee on the New York City Water Board. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dan Zarrilli.
Excellent. Thank you for that too kind introduction, Michael. Michael has been an incredible partner in this event series that we've been putting on since 2022. It's been a real pleasure to work with him. So please, let's give Michael a round of applause. Let me please invite the rest of my panelists up to the panel so we can start this conversation. Please come on up and join me. This is a great conversation that we've got starting here, and I'm really excited for this. We've got some really great experts. Again, my name is Dan Zarrilli. I'm the Chief Climate and Sustainability Officer at Columbia. On behalf of the Columbia Climate School, it's a real pleasure to be here and to moderate this conversation. And again, this is now a 4-year partnership with the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, and it's continued to shine a spotlight onto the critical issues of climate change, environmental justice, and how that plays out in communities like Harlem. And it's there's no more timely topic that we could be talking about. And so I really want to thank everybody for being here, for being part of this. We're also we're having this conversation in a moment that's impossible to ignore. It's already been addressed a few times, but we gather here with this work it's under assault. Regulations are being repealed, funding is being withdrawn, science is being attacked. All of that leaves us less safe and even more dependent on strong local leadership, which we're going to hear from here today. Because we know that climate change, one, it's real. There's no debate about that, right? We're here to have this conversation because we have this lived experience. We know what we're going through. The planet's getting hotter. That's playing out here in New York City. We're seeing these more intense storm events. All of that is having a direct impact on all of our lives. And we're going to be living with this reality for the rest of our lives. And so while all that's happening globally, we know that there are communities that are feeling this impact more acutely than others. Historic segregation, redlining has left communities, certain communities like Harlem, much more exposed to these risks. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that today. So thankfully, New York City has been a leader in this work. I'm pleased that we're joined here by many members of our panel that have had an impact on that work that's happening here in New York City. There's a lot to be proud of. There's a whole lot more to be done, I think, as everyone would nod their head. And so let's get into it. Without further ado, we've got a really great lineup of panelists here. Paul Azito from the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, Dr. Sheila Foster from Columbia Climate School, Michael Bobker from City College of New York, Adazia Coley from Rethink Food, and Christine Asuji from Con Edison. Again, we've got a great lineup here, and so I'm going to jump right into this. Paul, I'm going to start with you. We just heard about all the great work that's been happening on the environmental justice legislation, the implementation of that. Can you take a moment and describe, through your work, what have you most learned from this in this process since those laws were enacted? What's the most surprising piece? What does this audience really need to know? And what are the plans for that, for the environmental justice plan that we just heard about from Peggy?
Thank you so much for the question, Dan. So first and foremost, I want to thank Peggy Shepard. She's truly been a trailblazer. I certainly would not be in my job here today, and we would not have the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice with environmental justice in the name as one of the few environmental justice offices left in the country without her guidance and leadership. So thank you so much, Peggy. And so I joined the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice as Deputy Executive Director about 1.5 years ago. And on this journey, what I've learned over the course of a period of time is just how difficult this work is and just how important this work is for everyone in our communities, and particularly in Harlem. What Peggy identified, which is absolutely right, is that what happened in our HAMYC report is that we actually found over 100 indicators of harm on individuals and members in our community that impacts their daily lives. And what we did with that information is we quantified it, we validated it, we followed the climate science with Sheila Foster, who is on our Environmental Justice Advisory Board and on the New York City panel of climate change. And what we did was we looked at those issues. It's not just about air pollution, it's about air pollution in the context of your economic situation and the disinvestment in your community that goes back to redlining. And what the report does is it talks about the cumulative impact, the suffering on our communities, and how it articulates over the course of a number of different permutations, access to resources, exposure to climate events, exposure to air pollution and polluted water, and exposure to a number of other issues. And what that helps us to do, that modeling helps us to do, is makes the business case to the government, because the government likes to see data and facts and validation on why we need to solve these issues within our communities. Through the HAMYC report, we identified that 44% of New York City and 49% of New Yorkers are in environmental justice communities, are experiencing disinvestment in their communities, poor air quality, increased exposure to climate events day in and day out. And it made the compelling argument for why our office, working with city agency partners, needs to resolve those issues. And so what I've learned over the course of a period of time is that we have a lot of work to do. We have our environmental justice report. I would also encourage you not only to look at the environmental justice report, but to view the environmental justice mapping tool. When you have a 200 or 300 page report, people tend not to read it in full. It is a great document. We encourage you to read it, but we understand that our environmental justice mapping tool, which is at climate.nyc.gov, is a good opportunity for you all to be able to zoom in on Harlem, be able to click through what indicators down to your block impact you on a day-to-day basis, right? And so after we've come up with these tools, what we're doing now is we're working on the environmental justice plan. So since we published the environmental justice report, what we've done is we've engaged our city agency partners, we've engaged technical advisors, and we've really appreciated the guidance of the Environmental Justice Advisory Board on how to approach that work. And so where we are today, is that we are trying to identify solutions to environmental justice problems. And in the coming weeks, this is really the start of a dialogue on showing you our homework on how we're trying to identify those problems. And I'll go quickly over a few different ways that we're trying to impact this community in real time. So one of the issues in the environmental justice report is that if you're in a have community, a non-EJ community, you have access to 11 acres of park per 1,000 residents. And in EJ communities, you have access to 9 acres of park. Part of this planning effort is to try to resolve that gap. So work with the Parks Department, work with our schools to keep schoolyards open longer, to find opportunities for pocket parks or green spaces, places of refuge for people in our communities. And I'm proud to say that we're not just planning for the future, we're planning for now. And I'm proud to say that we worked with the DEC and the Parks Department. And just yesterday, the DEC announced a $43 million investment in the expansion of the Harlem River Greenway. In addition to access to resources, we're also trying to address the issues of extreme heat. It is the third heat wave of the summer. And so there are issues with being outside and there are issues with being inside. So one of the ways we're addressing the issues of outside, in addition to expanding areas of green refuge, is working on the tree disparity. If you're in a have neighborhood, you have more trees than a have not neighborhood. And it's about bridging that gap. And we've secured a commitment from the Parks Department to plant fully in high heat vulnerable areas by the end of 2027. In addition to that, our office is working on the first ever urban forest master plan for New York City. And the goal of that plan is to plant wherever practical, but importantly, preserve the mature trees we have, make sure that they grow big and tall, and they provide us with that canopy over the course of time, because we know that in areas where there are really robust tree canopies, that air temperature can be reduced by 3 degrees or more on a hot and sunny day. In addition to that, we're talking about outside, let's talk about inside. We are working on the maximum indoor air temperature for existing New York City buildings. So our office is advocating for the City Council to pass for new construction, a maximum indoor air temperature, so cooling requirements for every building constructed anew. And importantly and difficultly, we're working with our partners with WEAC, we're working with our partners at HPD and elsewhere to establish rules to make sure that existing buildings also have cooling requirements over the course of a period of time. We are working, and that will demonstrably address an issue that Peggy brought up earlier. As it relates to climate change, we're also working on, we know that our climate has changed recently. So we have transitioned in 2020 from a temperate climate to a subtropical climate. So we used to have weather that looked like Boston, and now we have weather that looks like Atlanta. And what that really means for us, growing up, I remember a rainy day would be clouds would come, you wouldn't see where the cloud cover would end and it would rain, right? And now we're seeing these cloudburst events where you can point to the cloud in the sky and you can see the rain come at you, and that torrential rain is really overwhelming our system. Our system was not designed to accommodate for that in the past. But what we're doing to address those issues is that we're trying to figure out green infrastructure. How do we open up our sidewalks? How do we detain the water so it doesn't go into the subway, so it doesn't overwhelm our basements, it doesn't overwhelm our sewer system in ways that causes a combined sewer outflow or other environmental issues that Peggy raised. That includes working with the Parks Department and the DEP on trying to really adjust the green infrastructure as it relates to the Harlem Mere. We got a $10 million investment in Harlem in order to really reconfigure and daylight more green space in and around and near the Harlem Mere on 106th Street, which used to be a stream. And we have a number of other cloudburst projects all throughout the neighborhood that we can go into. As it relates to sustainability, we have a goal of reducing. The way I think of it is there's adaptation and sustainability. Sustainability being reducing our harm on the environment, and adaptation being reducing the impacts of the environment due to climate change on us. As it relates to sustainability and reducing our harm on the environment and reducing our impacts on air quality, we're championing community solar. Community solar is very popular in New Jersey. Community solar is simply that you'll be able to elect with your electric bill to buy into a solar array somewhere in the neighborhoods, meaning that your electricity is directly correlated to be able to access solar. We're also working on a pilot for street vendor electrification. Many of you know that street vendors have a lot of emissions. They have likely 2 propane tanks, one to run a generator for the refrigerators and one to actually heat the food that you might be eating. And our goal is to work with street vendors to convert to an electric model so that we don't have those emissions day in and day out on our streets. And we have more and more ideas that are coming out of the Environmental Justice Plan. We are really honored to start this conversation with you today, talk about how we're trying to solve these issues and make sure that we're respecting procedural justice, that we're not just making decisions for our communities, we're making decisions with our community over the course of time.
Oh, that's so great. One of the, I think, great structures of the legislation, of course, is that it puts information into the hands of the community so that then they can come knock on your door. And so check all that information out and come knock on his door because he's the guy for it.
Our intergov staff is right over there.
Sheila, let me turn to you. Apologies that we weren't able to see the great video that you produced with the Columbia Climate School, but even better, we have you live and in person. So can you talk about your experience with this work on environmental justice and the legislation and being on the advisory board? What does this community need to know from sort of the academic and the understanding of this and your work with communities?
So sure. So my work in environmental justice, and I'm Peggy's biggest fan for sure, goes back to the early days of, I think, academics' roles in the environmental justice movement. And that role is documenting what communities like West Harlem's already know is happening in their community. So Peggy talks quite eloquently about the beginnings of We Act, right? And how folks know what they're smelling, they know what's going in their communities, and they can't be lied to. You know, in the early days of the environmental justice movement, it was really important for academics to then conduct nationwide studies and regional studies showing that communities of color and local communities that it's a pattern. It's just not a one-off here or there. And so over the years, you know, that's been the role of researchers. So I come to climate justice through that lens, working on environmental justice for many years, trying to document that, and occasionally serving as a lawyer. I was the lawyer on the Title VI complaint for the bus depot. So since 2016, I was asked to be on something called the New York City Panel on Climate Change. Some of you may have heard of the IPCC. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at the international level, where the consensus of scientists around the world is that climate change is real, right? No matter what the federal government believes right now, right? You can make up your own opinion, but not your own facts, right? And so New York created the NPCC under Bloomberg. And every 3 years under law, scientists and researchers are supposed to come together and look at the science and determine for New York City what are the climate impacts we're under. I was asked to be on a few years into that under de Blasio because equity had not been a part of that investigation. So in 2016, I was asked to come on and to start to document and start to bring together the science for equity and climate change. And so one of the first things I did was ask Peggy, We Act, Uprose, and folks in the Bronx, those community groups that were already engaged in this, to co-produce that knowledge with us. So we started to document through a social vulnerability analysis and case studies the intersection of environmental justice and climate impacts in New York. That was one report. 3 years later, we came back and we documented, we asked the question not only who is impacted and what kind of impact, but why they're impacted. And it turns out that there is a whole body of now documented social science that makes the connection between redlining and communities that were previously redlined by the Federal Housing and Loan Corporation in the 40s. Those communities still are exposed to flooding, right? Exposed to more heat, have more impermeable surfaces, less trees. We also know that when FEMA funds them for managed retreat, they get less money. We also know that when FEMA moves people out of harm, that people go into segregated communities, and Black and brown and poor people are at higher risk. So these are the kinds of documented answers and impacts that we're making sure are on the record, so that when New York City does adaptation, does an environmental justice plan, much like the report, that they're doing it in line with what we know to be true about who's impacted and why they're impacted. It's not just enough to say that they're impacted, but we have to start to roll back or address the legacy effects of urban renewal redlining and all the reasons why our communities are so vulnerable to environmental health, climate, and now energy insecurity.
And it's fascinating that what you're doing in some ways is validating what people already know in communities
Absolutely.
and doing it in ways that then help
Yeah.
support that policy work and that investment across the city. So thank you for that. Michael, let me turn to you. Your experience in buildings in particular, we know here in New York City that buildings account for about 70% of the greenhouse gases that, of course, are causing these climate changes that we're seeing. How have you seen that work here in New York City play out in this environmental justice lens?
So thank you, Dan. Before I answer, I just want to thank the Chamber for organizing the event. It's an honor to be here. I know that City College very much wants to be an engaged, contributing member of the Harlem community, and I want to represent City College President Vince Boudreau in this. So in my position as a research lab director, and I'm a buildings engineer by trade, but I've been running a lab for the last 20 years. And it's allowed me to think about how communities in general, and Harlem more particularly, can do just what you're asking about, which is work on their buildings, make them better, and have that contribute to the community's own health and wealth. So, in doing this thinking and in writing proposals for the work, I've been joined by a variety of City College faculty, students. I have one of my students here. I hope you will speak to her. And also have found a really great working partner in Clayton Banks, president of Silicon Harlem, right? And a board member of the Chamber. And the Chamber has also supported our proposals with letters of support. And I want to put out a shout out to the great thanks to the Chamber for that. So thank you, Lloyd, sadly gone, and Bosa. So let me start with an answer to your question. Just saying that for me, environmental justice is really about outcomes in terms of community health, and then even more community wealth, which includes both jobs and careers. So there is a huge amount of work to meet the city's pretty aggressive targets on carbon emission requirements, very aggressive targets, in fact. And they mostly come from our buildings. And that work can be leveraged into community wealth if we're intentional and proactive about it. Otherwise, we do the work and the wealth mostly goes elsewhere. And the work goes really deeply beyond green roofs or white roofs and solar panels. We're really talking about a very deep, what's called a deep energy retrofit that can meet the requirements of Local Law 97, New York City's kind of globally leading carbon emissions reduction law. And the elements of deep energy retrofit are pretty well understood. They basically represent a major makeover of mechanical and electrical systems in buildings and also of the building envelope. So better, more controlled ventilation air with heat recovery, really good windows, wall insulation, probably applied on the exterior, and replacing uncomfortable steam heat. We all live with the discomforts of steam heat. Replacing that eventually with heat pumps that also provide cooling. So we estimate this work to cost about $50 a square foot. That's about $40,000 per apartment. Working from public data, my students have identified that Harlem has about 10,000 buildings, 227 million square feet of floor area. And if you apply our $50 per square foot estimate to that, that comes out to $13 billion in investment. It's a lot of money to create a local market. If we train our local contractors and workforce in these particular specialties, and we train project managers to coordinate the work, supervise it, commission the work, and assure the outcomes on an ongoing basis, we keep those construction dollars in the community, creating skilled jobs and careers for our youth. This, to me, is a big part of environmental justice. If we master project finance, all of this work has to be financed, it doesn't get paid for by itself. We can efficiently lead local owners through decisions and through implementation. When we're investing, though, we have to, as outcomes, we get better. What we get are better buildings. They're more comfortable thermally. We have better indoor air quality. They're more affordable to heat and cool. And they're more resilient under the extreme conditions that we know we're going to face. So this is work we need to do for ourselves. In the process, we can also network our buildings, especially the largest commercial customers, to manage the aggregate electric load that our community has. If we trip over certain thresholds, electricity browns out or even blacks out for all of us. Okay? So we want to manage that load, improve our local grid reliability, and contract with Con Ed to do so. So more wealth kept in the community. But we do have to be careful as we make investments that we don't create the causes of displacement, rising rents. So carbon emissions and climate change, they're a social cost, and the reduction is a social goal. So the finance that we use to do the work should also be social, which is to say that we need a heavy dose of public funding, and we need to understand how to use the programs that exist. We thought we were going to get an influx of more funding that would push things along. That's going to have to wait for a while. But even with that pause, there are existing programs, and we need to learn how to master them with our community being proactive about it, so that we really, as an entity, not as individuals, but as an entity, understand how to get this work done. And in the process, we create a much better local economy.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. And I think you've teed up Christine maybe in a very direct way. Obviously, when the grid is strained, the electric grid is strained, we see voltage reductions and brownouts, and sometimes that hits certain communities more than others. Christine, how do you, as the utility that provides electricity and also gas in this neighborhood, how do you see your role as a utility in helping to achieve goals of environmental justice?
Yes, I think it was the eye contact that teed me up. So first I want to say that at Con Edison, this is the first, I am newly the first appointed Director of Environmental Justice for an energy company. And I think that says a lot about where we see our role in the future. And we have some very ambitious goals for the state as well as for the city. So my role is to lead the activities of our environmental justice program, as well as the disadvantaged communities efforts that aligns with New York State's CLCPA that Ms. Peggy Shepard had explained. It's the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. With that, the New York State Climate Justice Working Group identified disadvantaged communities all throughout New York State. And I'm taking a little bit of time to go into this because I think it's important to understand the impact that has to New York City's and what that group did that was groundbreaking for New York State. 60% of New York State, the entire state of disadvantaged communities, are in New York City. So that is significant, and it also shows the work that we have to do to move forward with very ambitious. We're a leader. The city is a leader. New York State is a leader with our climate laws, but also our environmental laws too. So some of the things that we have to move forward to ensure that our grid is prepared for this increased electrification, less reliance on our gas system. So it's really reimagining what our gas system is going to look like. It's going to be smaller, because it is healthier electrification, it is cleaner. So we're doing a lot of building. But I do want to say that I'm very excited to be in this role. I think it's a very important role. I think it's a really important moment. And I'm excited to be able to help shape a company, a utility like Con Edison in their environmental justice goals, and not just look at reliability, but also equity. So what are some of the things that we're doing? I'll just elaborate on a couple of things because there's a lot. But I think first and foremost, and I want to address you, Dr. Foster, is that as a utility, we need to accept the science. That's the first and foremost, because that's what's going to inform our long-term strategy and building our infrastructure. We first partnered with New York State and with Columbia University in helping us put together a climate change vulnerability study, which then informed our climate resiliency plan for the future. And that's the investment that we make in our infrastructure. So we did that in 2019. We did it again in 2023. And there were changes. Even more hotter days, it was concluded. Even more extreme events. So I say that because it's important that we need to continue to collaborate with our academic partners, our state, and getting this information and having our plans, our long-term plans, be flexible enough to meet the demands of our customers. So that's one. The second is that our role is we have to build the grid of the future. So what that means is that we have to meet customers' needs for greater electrification. And we also have to be flexible enough to accommodate clean other renewable resources, such as solar, such as wind. Dare I say wind, what's happening in the federal government, but I am going to say wind because this is just a moment in time. We will get through this. So we have to prepare for that as well. So that means that it requires investments, building substations. Substations are critical. For those that may not know what the work of a substation is, it manages voltage so it can get to your home in a safe and efficient way. So we want to ensure that the peak or the load that is on substations that supports the communities is doing it in a way that it's reliable. So that means no interruptions for you. So when we say we're the most reliable company in the country, that means that we have minimal interruptions when we are compared to like our peers across. So that's very important to us because that's what you're used to as New Yorkers. And we're designed to be that to meet that reliability. But it is a cost that comes with building substations. And in the eye of climate change, there is a cost to build the resiliency of our substations. So there's more flash flooding, localized flooding. It costs to ensure that we protect our substations. So through our substations hardening program, and we started the work, but we have to continue the work because the demand is increasing within our city and with in particular. So those are some of the things that we're doing. I mean, you may have heard, I know it's not in Manhattan, but we should all know what's going on in the different boroughs. But one of the substations, we call it our Reliable City Project in Idlewild, and that's in Southeast Queens. So that is a new substation. It is to support the Southeast Queens. We're building 2 substations actually as part of that and creating a new network because I have my family here, we live in Queens, that has been a part of that network, and we have experienced some outages, but due to the increased demand, even in those areas, there was a need for more reliability. So it will also support JFK's construction, so the electrification of the Port Authority's bus, there are EV vehicles. So all these things, we're here and we need to be able to meet the needs of our customers. So I also want to address, because I think it's very important when we talk about air pollution, air quality, and that's reimagining our gas system so that we are less reliant on fossil fuels, because that is what leads to, it's very harmful for our environment. So that means shrinking our gas system. That means greater electrification and demand on that end. But as we're going through this transition of shrinking our gas system, we also have to ensure that what's left behind is still safe and it's reliable. Some other things, which I think is very important, our role is really empowerment, empowerment of the community, to make sure that we're meeting their energy efficiency needs. Peggy Shepard had talked about the Manhattan Hub that WEACT administers. That's an example of what we could continue to do in collaborating with the community to help educate. That's a very critical role in this time, to help educate our customers and preparing them, because quite frankly, we have to have a different relationship with how we consume energy. So the more that we can reduce helps the grid, and it also helps keeps costs down. And these hubs are there. It's like a plethora of programs and offerings and education that they do to help customers to come off of fossil fuels and look for better electric alternatives, and helping them manage their energy more efficiently. So we collaborate. We also offer incentives for customers. And I just want to, sorry, I have a little bit of notes because I think it's also important to kind of state like what we're putting in to a program like that. So this is what we call our NENI program. It's New Efficiency for New York. And we have spent a total of $1.5 billion in incentives for our customers. And that's residential, that's commercial, and it's also large businesses, to help them become more energy efficient. And that was from the period of 2020 to 24. And I think what's also important, because we can't forget disadvantaged communities, because we need to make sure that they're benefiting and we're not bypassing them as we're transitioning in our to a more cleaner economy, as well as making investments in resiliency. So nearly 93 million of the 1.5 billion went over to 160,000 low to moderate income customers and affordable multifamily energy efficiency programs. So these are some of the things that we're doing. There's a lot that we're doing. I mean, I could talk here for probably an hour, and that's not fair to my fellow panelists. But I think what's also important is that we're seen as a trusted partner. And I know trust is earned, and I know it's ongoing. But I think, as we continue to collaborate together, understanding what the needs of the community are, solutioning around them before we start building infrastructure so that we ensure that their needs are met more effectively.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I feel like we've come so far from the time when the city worked with Con Ed originally to bake climate science into a rate case way back probably 12 years ago for the first time, and to help to encourage those investments. So it's so important, the work you're doing. Thank you. Adanze, I would love to turn to you, and I'm so excited that you were able to join our panel today, because I think it really provides a completely different and necessary component to this, to talk about the role of food and climate change and environmental justice. So we'd love for you to talk about your organization and the work you do to help encourage environmental justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for having me here. Just a quick question. How many folks bought some food item this week? Raise your hand. Grocery store, matcha latte, I don't know. Okay, most of us in the room. Now imagine like if it was groceries or a sandwich, every time you bought something, you literally threw half of it away every single time. That's effectively what the city of New York does with institutional food. The comptroller came out with a study last year that demonstrated that for every $2 the city spends, approximately $1 of it is being thrown away. And that's really the core of the challenge that we're trying to solve at Rethink Food. We're a nonprofit based here in the city, really focused on building more equity and sustainability within our food system. Our founding team are chefs. I'm the lone non-chef, and they remind me of it every single day. But folks that are coming from hospitality, that are chefs, that love food, that love feeding people, is really our ethos and how we come to this work. A little bit more that I could share about our organization and particularly the work that we do here in Harlem, and I would be remiss to not honor Lloyd today. I'm a DC girl, new to New York, and he really spent time with both me and Matt, our founder, and has really had been such a positive force in helping us really in the early days of getting our work off the ground here in Harlem and supporting particularly our work with Salem United Methodist Church. But at the core of what we're doing, there's so many facets to our food system, and it's so personal because so many of us really, everybody in this room raised their hand is so personal to us. Every one of us has such a strong memory around food, whether it was a grandmother, an auntie, or an uncle that made something, or you yourself. And a lot of what we aim to do is bring that joy around food, but also think about ways that we can improve within our system to reduce the waste that currently exists, not just at an institutional level, but even at an individual level. So, when we started our organization back in 2017, it was really with a simple observation. Going to a soup kitchen, going to a food pantry, going to a meal distribution at a church, the quality of food that's there is not always the best, right? And I think, for folks who are most vulnerable, we should be giving our best. And we thought, who best to give a really beautiful, nutritious, healthy meal than a local restaurant, than a local chef. And so that's really how we got started. But as you know, resources are not necessarily that abundant, and we were trying to figure out what are some ways that we could do this in a way that's not only sustainable economically, but environmentally. And our founding team thought, how many restaurants throw away food at the end of every night? How many grocery stores throw away perfectly good produce that could otherwise be eaten? And that's really where the core of our work started. And so to date, we have provided over 33 million meals to New Yorkers, to folks in Miami, to folks in Chicago, and thinking about how we can leverage the resources that already exist in our food system, the existing food that we have, because we're throwing a lot of it away, the existing talent, our chefs, our restaurant partners, et cetera, and also our logistics, the trucks that are already on the road. One thing that I think is really amazing, and Dan, we were talking about, what are some of the interplays between the environmental justice plan and the work that we're doing, is thinking about more creative solutions that align both equity and sustainability with how we get food to people. Earlier this year, Hunts Point and Grow NYC opened up, not in Harlem, but in the Bronx at Hunts Point, a new food hub, which is incredible, and really excited for what that means in terms of food security here in the city. In addition to that, was the inclusion of blue highways, right? I think about all of the water that we're consistently surrounded by. Last Thursday, I felt very intimately connected to how much water we're surrounded by, trying to get home. But using blue highways, the water systems that are around us to, limit the number of trucks, for example, that we have to use to get our food from point A to point B. So those are examples, I think, of opportunities that as a city, we can really partner with, nonprofits like our own, and the existing infrastructure that we have. And then beyond that, I think a lot about some of the structural challenges that other panelists raised, redlining, systemic disinvestment, and other things that really, unfortunately, are not unique to places like Harlem, but we see consistently time and time again. And, food insecurity layers on top of that. Health outcomes also layer on top of that. We talk about air pollution and asthma, but we also have to talk about, diabetes and other chronic health conditions. They all kind of compound and layer on one another. And so, the work that we're trying to do is really through the plate and using food as a way to not only build equity, but also sustainability and giving people an opportunity to connect with each other in a meaningful way, but also with a meal that was, created with love and care and joy. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think, and I'm going to maybe look over to my friends, and we can take a few questions from the audience. Excellent. So this has been great content. I think we want to open up and allow the audience members to take some questions, so that we don't miss that opportunity. So if there's a hand or two, I would take it right now. And if there's not, then I'm going to keep asking questions. And I see one in the back. So yes, sir. And try to keep it to a
very minimum,
relatively short question. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, panelists, for such a great round of questions and answers. My name is Raheem Williams. I'm also from the Columbia Climate School. I'm from the Bronx, and I currently work for the New York City Assembly. And I'm actually working on a research assignment this summer to see how New York City has been approaching climate policy. And a lot of what you mentioned, Local Law 97, food redistribution, also grid distribution as well, has all been a part of the questions that I've been, looking to find an answer to. So my question to you guys is, how well do you think the city is doing when it comes to approaching these climate policies?
Paul, you can't answer. I'm kidding. You could obviously answer.
I'd love to answer from the food perspective. So we work really closely with the Mayor's Office of Food Policy, and there have been so many interlays between, the work that, Paul's team has been doing and the work that office has done. One thing that I think is a huge win is composting. I know it's not something, I know like the process of doing it is new and different, but just the sheer like administrative lift it took and the infrastructure and planning it took to add basically another stream to our waste management, I think is something to be celebrated, and also the rollout of it across the 5 boroughs. Just to put it into perspective, since we implemented it, we have diverted over 2,000 tons of food waste. And just for people to understand what that means, because I'm like, 2,000 tons, what does that mean? That's approximately 6, 757s, like huge, like it's a huge amount of food on a regular basis. And I think that's something we can be proud of, but also obviously we have more to do there.
Jill, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, everyone can do better, but I think that that New York City actually is ahead of the curve on all of the things you mentioned. And one of the things that we did in our last report on climate justice for MPCC4, and there's a website, if you look at the New York City Panel on Climate Change, we have plain language summaries, is that we actually reviewed everything that New York City had done on environmental and climate justice over the past few years, and noted some areas of improvement, but the comprehensiveness, I think, has been amazing. And let me just say one more thing, is that one of the things we tried to press in our last report was that the city moved beyond just narrow focuses on like food or environment and climate, and look at the intersection with displacement and housing. You brought this up, that really these are intersectional issues. And I think that, again, New York City has done a really good job of that. And I'm happy to be working on the New York City plan as well as on energy and security issues in New York. So
I want to give Paul maybe the last one on this, but Michael, do you want to?
Yeah.
You indicated you wanted to say something.
Yeah, New York City has been leading the curve, as you say, with legislation. City council has been very, very forceful. In Maryland, successive Maryland administrations have stood up to the real estate industry that really wanted to roll things back. And we see in our communities, we see a lot of grassroots activity in urban gardens, in the food sector, people making green spaces. pretty low cost, okay? Where I think there's room for a lot of improvement is really, and you mentioned community empowerment, is where we need lots of investment, where it's not a low cost grassroots activity, but it is an activity that needs investment. We have not engaged the communities really well in planning that and making that kind of a public good that we are pushing out and getting the enabling the communities to do things for themselves with a lot of investment money. You know, there's a little bit of it, but it's a lot of information. You know, we inform people, oh, you can go here and get some money. You can go there and investigate these programs. But we don't have a systematic way of putting that money onto the street.
Understood.
Participatory budgeting.
Indeed, there was participatory budgeting. I think the simplest way to answer your question is that we do see ourselves as leaders. We try to be held accountable and hold ourselves accountable. We are really trying to appreciate the guidance, the vision, and the drive of the Environmental Justice Advisory Board to do better and to do more. And so I think that's the simplest way of answering, is that we are doing better than we did in the past. It's still not enough, and we're looking forward to doing more through the Environmental Justice Plan and beyond, and consulting with you through that process to make sure that your thoughts and views are reflected in some of the solutions that we're trying to co-create.
In other words, we will do as well as we get pushed to do, we get encouraged to do, right?
Maybe a little more.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. I see one hand, and then, so maybe I think we'll take two more, but one here, yeah.
Hello, thank you. Thank all the panelists. My name is Will Jones. I just graduated from grad school in urban planning. I have two questions. I'll keep them short. One is, could any of you talk to me or talk to the room a little bit about how sensors are used by New York City for collecting data, particularly as it relates to citizen science and bringing more people into data collection, processing, and understanding? My second question is around insurance. You know, we saw a big response from the insurance industry as wildfires hit California. I'm wondering, with cloudbursts, floods, et cetera, how particularly New York City's public assets are protected as it relates to that, and if that's a new stressor.
Those are great questions. So what school, by the way?
MIT.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Very nice.
Well, we welcomed you to the, I'm a planner.
I think that's a job offer, right? Is that a job offer?
We've got, there's a couple planning firms in the back. I can see we should talk after this. Anyway, so as it relates to sensors are there, we have so think about this, like our climate risks are emerging, right? And so we are coming up with sensor networks. I think the one that we like to talk about the most is FloodNet. FloodNet is a constellation of over 250 sensors citywide. FloodNet, I would encourage you all to Google it right now. I think we have a QR code for it in the back of the room somewhere. You'll be able to access that data and know in real time in those locations whether or not flooding is occurring. They're sound-based, so they ping off the ground and get a sense of the depth of the issue at hand. We are working with the state and the DEP and others on trying to detect for air quality issues. We have a lot of mobile opportunities to detect for air quality issues. That's not quite sufficient. We're looking at more comprehensive ways to detect for air quality. Extreme heat is, again, an emergent issue in New York City. We're talking about how to detect for extreme heat. If you put a heat sensor on a building, depending on where you place it on the building, if it's in sunlight, it'll dramatically impact whether or not it can detect heat. So that's an evolving conversation that we have. And so I think it's a longer way of answering your question that I would encourage you to look at FloodNet. Feel free to engage in conversations with us about how we're thinking about other means to detect climate risk throughout New York City. And so that's one part of your question. The second part of your question, insurance is a really weighty issue that we're working through. We have a lot of insurance service providers in New York City that are considering whether or not they want to exit the market. It's a huge risk for us in our 100-year floodplain. We're working with those insurance service providers to figure out how to make sure that they understand where our coastal protections are going to come online and what we are doing as a community to make sure that we are limiting the risk that they are perceiving as they're trying to price flood or insurance policy citywide. We're seeing insurance policies skyrocket citywide. It's a huge issue within our community. And as it relates to the climate context, we are working on that. One of the pilot innovations that we're working on is parametric insurance. Parametric insurance is different than what you would see in a routine insurance policy. A routine insurance policy is you have flood insurance, it floods in your building, your basement is flooded, an adjuster has to go out, they have to see what the damage is, and they size the cash payment to the damage plus whatever the terms and conditions of the contract are. Parametric insurance is actually triggered much more quickly. So think of a parametric measure is if the wind blows or it rains to a certain degree in a certain area, you already will be triggered for a cash payout. So that means that you don't have to wait for an adjuster. You can get paid within weeks, and it enables a different kind of rapid recovery that may be more contemporary with the needs of New Yorkers today. Because we piloted this policy over the course of a couple years, we were able to help make the business case, and that's why last year the governor signed legislation enabling parametric insurance to be a typology of insurance policy that's available in New York State. And we are working with Department of Financial Services and others on making sure that the rules around parametric insurance are reasonable for folks in New York City.
Great. I promised one more question. I think I put in front. And I think we're gonna. Yeah, please. Stacey.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Philippa Carteron, and I actually have 2 questions. But first and foremost, I want to thank this panel has been incredible, and I have gained a great deal of information. So thank you, all of you. And I want to say a shout out to my niece, Christine Asuji.
I sense a softball coming.
And I have, she's putting her hand down, but I also have to shout out my daughter who's been working in environmental science for yum years. But my question 1 is, do you believe that the catastrophe that's been happening in Harlem around the Legionnaire's disease is part of what we're talking about tonight? Okay, and number 2, to the young lady here who spoke, am I saying your name right? Adezio Coley? Adeze. Well, Adeze, you talked about food injustice. There used to be an organization, or I used to be with the city, but there used to be an organization. To be honest with you, I don't remember whether it was private or whether or not it was a city agency. But there was a city agent, or there was an organization that used to collect the food and redistribute it. Is that still the case, and do you work with them?
Probably City Harvest. Is that?
Yes, that's what thank you.
And the head of City Harvest is now the head of the mayor's office of food policy, which is a nice.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So short answer, yes, absolutely. They actually, we rent a storage space from them down in Sunset Park, which is very nice and under market. So we appreciate them. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I'm happy to hear that, because we need consistency and we need to build on things that have worked in the past and make them better for now, especially in light of what we have all alluded to that we're facing right now. And the other question was, my first question was the one about the Legionnaires.
Yeah, does anyone have an opinion on Legionnaires? Do we have any health experts that might be able to?
It's a really good question.
It's a very good
question.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, and
I don't know that too.
yeah, maybe the panel can't address it, but maybe we can talk after and find an
It's
answer.
okay if you don't answer, but I want to put it out there because I think we need to take a look at it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
So I
much.
was told I have one more question, which I think Felipe over here is going to get the last word for question for the panelists.
Thank you very much. My name is Natalie Patasaw, and I'm with the NAACP. I'm the state chairperson for the Environment and Climate Justice Committee. And my question is about what is the work that you were doing around the 200 plus housing authority developments in New York City? Because if you're talking about environmental justice, that is certainly where we have clusters of low income families, and not only just those specific developments, but also the communities around them are also generally low income as well. They have food desert problems, they have air quality issues, and more specifically, when Governor Hochul was proposing to put offshore wind off the Rockaway Peninsula. I looked up, because we had to write a paper on it, and I looked up where the power plants were in New York City, and many of them, as you know, I see you nodding your head, are in Western Queens. They used to call it Big Alice. I don't know if they still call it that, but they power a lot of the energy needs in Manhattan. But also I looked at where the other peaker plants were and all, and they're not in our high mortgage neighborhoods. They all happen to be in lower income communities. And there are so many different health impacts because of course they are burning fossil fuels. And I would like to know if anybody on the panel, especially the gentleman who's doing building information, what can you do about that? And most of the funding, of course, comes from the federal government. So it's not something that all the cities have some amount of control. Can anybody
Great. No, I
address
think
any of this?
so. Either both NYCHA and peaker plant siting. I'm sure we have opinions. Christine.
Okay, so I'll first address the peaker plants. At Con Edison, we don't own the peaker plants, but that does not say that we do not utilize them when we need to. So when we talked about demand, so we design our systems based upon peak demand. And when that threshold has been increased, we will then exercise the use of a peaker plant to trying to support that so that it avoids power interruptions to the network. Yes, I agree, peaker plants are very expensive in the sense that of health-wise, the risks that it has, the impacts, because when you load up those peaker plants, they do exhaust a lot of pollutants into the air that is unhealthy to the surrounding neighborhoods. And as we know, the environmental justice advocacy groups have been very clear and loud about getting rid of the peaker plants. I think that as we move to a more electrified grid, that it will reduce and eliminate the need for peaker plants. That is the plan, but it's, don't rely, because the other side is that we don't want people to be without power. As far as some things that we're doing, we have run some pilot programs, especially around community solar in NYCHA buildings. So we collaborated with NYCHA. So these are customers like me. I'm a renter, so I don't have access. I can't install solar and things of that nature, and nor do these particular customers have to themselves. There's no fee or cost for them to participate. We just enroll them into this program where it allows them to generate from solar, 3 kind of solar distribution sites, and then they get monthly credits on their bill. So I think part of it with the low income customers, yes, there's retrofitting energy efficiency. It's very difficult for people to manage their energy consumption when the building itself is not energy efficient. So that's why we have like the New York, the NENI programs that I referred to, the New Efficiency in New York, to encourage customers to retrofit their buildings. Especially you get additional incentives if you're in a disadvantaged community. But here we also have to make it affordable for low-income customers that can participate in the clean energy, as well as keeping their bills at a reasonable rate that they can pay. So that's one of the things that we're experimenting with. We're also experimenting with a geothermal program in Manhattan, in NYCHA. So it has not been approved. We have done like a pilot on it. We have submitted recently what we think are the benefits to having geothermal energy. That's another renewable energy. And it's looking at partnering like with NYCHA buildings to put that in place. Now, whether it gets approved or not, because there were 3 cases that we submitted, but here are some of the things that we're doing, trying to come up with more innovative solutions, partnering with NYCHA and other community-based organizations so that we can ensure that low-income, disadvantaged communities are not getting left behind.
Great, thank you for that, Christine. Last word, Paul?
Sure. Just a couple different investments in NYCHA properties. So just here in Harlem at the Clinton houses and the Thomas Jefferson houses, we really appreciate working with our partners at NYCHA. We try to work with them early and often because we understand the co-benefit of really resourcing a community that's been left behind. So with Clinton houses and with Thomas Jefferson houses, we're working on Cloudburst. Cloudburst is detaining water on site to make sure that it doesn't get to people's units or they don't have a hard time getting to the street or to work. And also the benefit of making sure that we're not overwhelming the sewer system. And it also has the benefit of just making the site nicer. So that's one instance of us working directly closely with NYCHA in Harlem, but also beyond. Second is through our urban forest plan. What we detected was that NYCHA has some of the most important tree canopy in the city. It is mature, it is tall, it is beautiful, and is in heat vulnerable areas and provides really key and vital places for refuge and trying to identify and make sure that we sustain that tree canopy over the course of a period of time. We're also identified as part of the urban forest plan real opportunities to motivate in the environmental justice plan, green collar jobs. We're working with Green City Forest, who's working with NYCHA residents to make sure that people fully appreciate that green collar jobs are not just in the solar industry, which we appreciate, but it's also tree planting and sustaining our natural environment over a period of time. And lastly, I'll say that we're working wherever possible to pilot with NYCHA heat pump systems in their properties. We've worked really successfully, and we're proud of our work with NYCHA and Woodside Houses on how to pilot that work.
Shout out to the work you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So great questions from the audience. I think we're going to wrap up this panel conversation right now. Please, another round of applause for our great panelists. And let me turn it back over to Skip. I think I'll let my panelists rejoin their seats. Thank you.
Another hand for our esteemed panel, please. We really appreciate them, and they'll be available for just a few minutes if you have any individual questions. Very quickly, breaking news. So, talking about climate change. So, J.D. Vance's team, our vice president, had water levels on the Ohio River near his boat raised for his family's boating trips, had water pumped into the boating channel. The incident raises questions of exploitation of public services, but the Secret Service said it was requested for safe navigation. Can't make this stuff up, folks. All right. We're going to get ready to wrap up in just a few minutes, but I had to bring a very special guest to the podium here. Dr. Patricia Ramsey, president of Medgar Evers College. She serves as the 6th president of Medgar Evers, appointed by the City University of New York Board of Trustees, officially taking office on May 1, 2021. She holds the distinction of being both the first woman and first scientist to serve as president of the college's distinguished national role model by Minority Access, Inc. Dr. Ramsey has a passion for making a difference. Dr. Ramsey's extraordinary capabilities were evident immediately upon assuming her role. After only 6 weeks at the helm, she submitted a proposal that resulted in a historic $20 million grant award, the single largest in Medgar Evers College history. This transformational funding enabled the creation of 2 groundbreaking initiatives: the Cultivating Holistic Academic Mindsets to Promote Student Services program, which provides up to a full ride for qualifying students, and the Brooklyn Recovery Corps program, which offers experimental learning through paid internships and career support while benefiting Brooklyn communities. Man, I need to go back to school. Dr. Patricia Ramsey, please give her a hand.
Thank you. And before I begin, I just want to say, had it not been for Lloyd Williams, Medgar College would not be a part of the Harlem Week activities. And particularly, I would not have been introduced to this audience as a speaker and one who really is a proponent of environmental justice. And so my hat's off to Lloyd Williams and, of course, the members of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. Thank you. Now, we've had a very robust discussion today or this evening by our panelists. And as you all can see from what was offered by the panelists, it is not a single factor that actually impacts our environment or our climate. It is multifactorial. And as Dr. Shepherd was speaking, and she spoke about the asset that was presented to the community as an asset by having a park. I said that is really interesting because that is what happens to our communities, to Black and Brown communities all over the country. And so as she was speaking, I was thinking about, I'm from Virginia originally, and I was thinking about this housing project that was in Hopewell, Virginia, and the playground was grass, and they decided we're going to beautify, they being the city, this playground, and decided to, instead of having grass, have crushed tires that they put all over this playground. It was beautiful as it relates to how it looked, but the toxins coming off of those tires with those children out there playing was just horrendous. And so I had a cousin who at that time was a very big activist and a part of the civil rights movement, walking out with Martin Luther King. As a matter of fact, he's the one who did the prayer on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. I reached out to him and I said, look, we have to do something about this. And so I wrote an environmental justice proposal for that community and connected it with St. Paul's College, who no longer exists today, but connected it with St. Paul's College so that we could do something to turn that whole community around. And so I'm saying that to say higher education institutions have a significant role to play in climate change and in environmental justice because we, yes, are higher education institutions, but we are located in communities. And so I commend Columbia School of Climate Science for their involvement, as well as my sister institution, City College, for their involvement here in the Harlem community. Well, when I first met Lloyd, and I have shared this publicly before, it was during the pandemic that I arrived, and we had a meet and greet. Dr. Evelyn Castro, who is here with me tonight, and I introduced her back in April when I spoke, set up all of these meet and greets. And one of the meet and greets, at the recommendation of Michael Flanagan, was with Lloyd Williams. And I remember at the end of that conversation, he said, I don't see Harlem as a location. I see it as a state of mind. And so I quickly said, this is the first time I'm meeting this person, but I quickly said, well, at Medgar College, we have a Harlem state of mind.
And so the partnership with the chamber started that day. And so Medgar Evers, for those of you who don't really know about the college, Medgar Evers College was birthed out of the Central Brooklyn community, the Black community of Central Brooklyn. And it was because of the advocacy of that community that the college even exists. And during that time, the community wanted a four-year institution in their community. And I am not speaking out of turn by saying, if you look in the archives, you will see that it was stated, we're not putting a college in that ghetto. And so it was under duress, I would say, that the community was able to get that college through great advocacy. And so I always say, Medgar Evers College, birthed out of the Central Brooklyn community with social justice in its DNA, named for Medgar Wiley Evers, who gave his life for the rights of people in Mississippi, the civil rights of people in Mississippi who had an impact really upon the nation. And I'm speaking about that because he was a true activist. And this year, had he lived, he would have been 100 years old. And so we are celebrating his life throughout this year. And in our efforts to live our mission of social justice, back in 2022, we were able to get our Senator Zelma Mari to actually put in a bill that would support our efforts. And so in partnership with SUNY School of Environmental Science and Forestry, we have a project, and it is so very close and near and dear because I just sit with tables of about 50 students from high schools just on Tuesday to talk about what their passions are. But this project called the Timbuktu Project is a project where we're taking the students who are in the urban high schools and we are bringing them to the campus and we are training them as it relates to things of the environment, because those of us in this room are going to be gone off of the scene, but we need to have people coming up who care and who know and who understand that it is important that they advocate for their communities and the environment. And so these young people are getting trained on the campus for 2 weeks, and then they go up to the Adirondacks where they spend another couple of weeks learning all they can about the environment, about climate, about green jobs. And this is something that we have been doing now. This is our third year, and we do typically we do 3 cohorts during the summer. And so that program is going on at the college right now. But it is really interesting that people have decided that it is not important for us to continue to look at environmental justice. And it is also interesting for people not to see that it is only certain communities that are affected by the negative impacts of what is happening in the environment. I'm pretty sure that most of you have heard of, well, I won't make that assumption. How many of you have heard of Cancer Alley? So most of you have heard of Cancer Alley. Well, down in Louisiana, about an 85 span of the Mississippi River, you have a large population of Black folks because that's where a lot of plantations existed. And so they noticed a high incidence of cancer. And so the community, in recognizing this, because they had put all of these plants in that area, starting to notice this high incidence of cancer. But not only that, there was a notice that the plants, certain species began to disappear. And so I always say, with regard to diversity, with regard to the environment, with regard to anything we're looking at as human beings, we need to take some lessons from nature. Now, if a plant species starts to disappear, we need to really be concerned. I'm a botanist by training, and I'm a teacher at heart. And so, as human beings, we all have cells, and we all know that. The cell membrane is the outermost part of the cell for all animals. But plants, in addition to that membrane, have a cell wall, which protects them even more. But guess what? If a plant is dying and it has a wall, what do you expect is happening to us? And so we need to be very cognizant. And so organizations like We Act, so important. And it is the community organizing that can really make an impact. And so that community down there in Louisiana got with the EPA, a lawsuit was filed. And I'm only speaking about this because of what was shared by some of the panelists and also Dr. Shepherd. Well, and during President Biden's administration, there was a lawsuit against a company that was one of the biggest, I would say, pollutants for the community. And on March the 25th, according to the information that I was able to read through Googling, on March the 25th, that lawsuit was dropped. And so we are up against a lot. But again, together, we can really make an impact. And so for people who are looking to form grassroots organizations, we have an expert right in our audience here. And for localities that people seem not to be as informed, if there is an institution close by, then I feel it is the responsibility of that institution to get involved. And so at Medgar Evers College, we are doing quite a bit in the area of environmental justice. We have a program in environmental science. And for those of you who may not know, Medgar Evers has the highest percentage of Black students of any school in the state of New York. And so we, by congressional designation, are considered a predominantly Black institution. And the last thing I want to say, in thinking about our community and what happens, when I first arrived, of course, those of you who have been into Central Brooklyn know that the botanical gardens are located very close to Medgar Evers College, 1 block away, actually. And so I met the president of the botanical gardens, and he talked about the fact that the flight paths of the helicopters that I would say the wealthy decided that they wanted to fly to not be in traffic were coming right through the communities such as our community at Medgar Evers College. And what they noticed, again, look at nature, is that the leaves on the plants in the botanical gardens had started to be affected. And so because of the advocacy of that group, then something was able to happen to get that flight path changed. And so I admonish each of you to not walk out of here tonight and say, oh, that was a really great summit. But to really think about how it impacts you as a person, how it impacts your families, and how it impacts the communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patricia Ramsey. And right now, Michael, come on up.
Yes, so, we're both doing this joint thank you.
Okay.
First, let's thank our MC. And we want to thank the keynote speakers, the panelists, and most importantly, you, the audience, for being here. So it's been a pleasure for us from the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce to provide this information for you through the panelists and the keynote speakers. We also want to very importantly thank all our sponsors because without them we could not have done this. This is very important, especially in these times when as several speakers have said, we have reduced grants or just canceled grants and funding sources. So. Just being again a big thank you. We're going to bring up our executive director one more time, Winston Majette, to just share some information, and then the panelists will be available for questions and conversation and discussion afterwards. Thank you.
And for those of you who may have missed who those sponsors are, presenting sponsor, Columbia Climate School, the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, West Harlem Development Corporation, Con Edison, the U.S. Small Business Administration, Odyssey, Rethink Food, who, by the way, when they mentioned they partnered with the Chamber and they had meals distributed at Salem United Methodist Church, we're up to 1 million since the pandemic of food and meals and pantry items that we've been giving out to the citizens of New York City. We can never thank you enough. Harlem Week. We're back at it again. The National Urban League, the Harlem Community Development Corporation, Amazon Access. Make sure you get your bag. Harlem Arts Alliance, the City College of New York, BMCC, Meg Evers College, our media partners, the New York Amsterdam News, AM New York that has a great wraparound about Harlem Week, the New York Christian Times, a partner and a fan of Patricia Ramsey and what she's doing in Brooklyn. 1010 Wins, Fox 5, that was the camera that you saw. Actually, that PIX was the camera you saw. Fox is going to be who you see when you come out Saturday to the Percy Sutton 5K. And also Manhattan Community Board number 10. But this is also, thank you very much. That's our board member, Lucille McEwen. She's our legal eagle, so she takes care of a lot of the legalese that goes through the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. But Black Health Matters, the Harlem Week Health Conference that we have coming up on the 14th. I'd like our chairman for Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Padmore John, who is a deputy commissioner for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, to tell you a little bit about that before we close.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, I should say. And thank you so much for being here. I think it was a wonderful discussion, and to the point that Dr. Ramsey said, let's not just look at this and be here and accept the information, but go out there and move and act upon it. So just wanted to invite you all to the Black Health Matters Health Summit and Expo. Over the past 3 or 4 years, we have been doing this together with Black Health Matters, and the intent has been to really pass in information about some of the challenges we're facing as a community here in Harlem and other similar communities across the U.S. and ways of addressing it. Part of it is, especially for Harlem, as many of you know, there was a significant life expectancy decrease because of COVID. Many of you will see that, and if you go to the Department of Health website, this one of Healthy NYC's initiative in terms of addressing that health expectancy decrease. Now we're starting to see that life expectancy starting to come back up, but very specifically, there's a great gap that's happening between many of the other races and African Americans. And so this is part of the conversation that we're going to be having here on the Black Health Matters. It's going to be a Thursday, August 14th, next Thursday at Riverside Church from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We encourage you to register, get there, and be there. There's going to be a variety of information, fun activities. And one of the key things I think as well is that encouraging this intergenerational and multi-generational discussions about how we can be supportive of each other in terms of addressing some of our health outcomes. Some of them, of course, related to the climate change that we're seeing. So hope to see you there. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and continue to bring on Winston to send us off again. Thank you.
Thank you, Padmore. Quite a few of you heard others talk about our president and CEO, Mr. Lloyd Williams. And he was responsible for a lot. 51 years ago, when he started Harlem Week, he wasn't president and CEO. But as someone who told me on the street, they couldn't believe he was still president and CEO because they remember him in 1974 with Harlem Day. I said, why do you want to break something that doesn't need to be fixed? It just needs to continue. So, unfortunately, he passed away early this morning. He had been sick for quite some time this year with cancer. But being around Lloyd Williams was like being in a living classroom 24 hours a day. You were a student. And I was one of those students for about 42 years with him. So I learned a lot. And one of the things he always wanted us to do is to communicate with each other, and that builds community. So at this time, I'd like you all to give a moment of silence for our President and CEO, Mr. Lloyd Williams. If you could please stand. Thank you very much. And you can start mixing and mingling because I heard some questions in the back that didn't get a mic. So I'd like you to meet our panelists, talk to them, and find out more about what they do and what you can do to be a part of the solution and not just keep repeating the problem on climate change. Thank you all for coming this evening. Look forward to seeing you all.